Welcome to episode 1 of The Darker Side of Boxing. This is season 3, your first episode of the season, and what a hell of an opener we have for you. Now, before we had the likes of Prince Naseem Hamed, the flamboyant boxer from the UK, we had a certain Hector Macho Camacho, the original man of flamboyancy. Hector Macho Camacho is a fighter who we have enjoyed watching growing up, but he's also a fighter that had many troubles outside of the ring and an untimely demise. And the purpose of this episode is to talk about his story, his beginnings, how it all became, and how he got himself into the ring, moments of triumph and tragedy, and the untimely demise and the subsequent aftermath of what happened in his untimely demise. A case which has now been officially closed, and a case which we're very much looking forward to talking about for many reasons. So Johnston, episode number 1, Hector Macho Camacho, your initial reactions to Macho Camacho and, of course, this story.
It's a great opener. It really is. It's a bumper opener, to be fair. We wanted to do that, and Hector Macho Camacho there's no better guy than this man to discuss for our opening of Dark Side of Boxing season 3. And what I will say is, although when looking on the outside of Hector, I always assumed he was a bit of an arrogant prick, to be honest. I didn't quite like his attitude at times, but looking deeper into it and sort of reading and watching documentaries on him, and the general consensus is that he was a nice guy away from the cameras. He looked after people, but he was in a tough upbringing. And I'm just going to use an extract from Jeff Miller of Ocean Country Register, and this best describes the extravagance of Hector Macho Camacho, which you rightly just mentioned a minute ago, sort of comparing him to Prince Naseem Hamed. And this is what he said. He said, "This was a man who once had 15 cars but no driver's license. He was a singer and a dancer, a regular on Puerto Rican television, where he would lean into the camera and proclaim, 'I'm to boxing what Michael Jackson is to music.' He entered the ring in sequins and feathers, dressed in various times as a fireman, a Trojan, or a gladiator. Once he entered the ring even wearing a diaper, and he dressed in capes, fur-trimmed hats. He liked to have that single curl of hair decorating his forehead." And I thought that was a great description of Hector Macho Camacho before we even begin this story.
So, like we do with all our stories, we like to go back as far as possible to set some context about the individual's life. And we are going to begin going back to Hector Camacho's mum and dad, which was Maria Esther Matias, and she married Héctor Luís Camacho Sr. when she was just 14 years of age. Now, they met while Maria was on holiday in Puerto Rico with her parents, and she fell in love with the handsome Hector Sr., who was 17. In 1961, Maria gave birth to her first child, Raquel, and then a year later, on May the 24th, 1962, Hector Camacho Jr. was born. Maria had to raise 2 children while suffering from physical abuse and striving to keep food on the table. Raquel recalled, "When we were living in Puerto Rico, we were living on the poor side. I will always remember that my grandmother had to cook for us on a brick. We were walking with no shoes." When Hector was 4 years old and Raquel was 5, Maria became fearful of Hector Sr.'s escalating violence and her life, so decided to send the children to New York, where her family lived, so that they could be safe. Maria, who followed the children sometime after, she recalled, "I was crying because he was my husband and I loved him. I had known him since I was 14 years old." They stayed with her father, Tito, who she named Camacho Jr. after, and his wife, but when Camacho Sr. realised they would not be returning, he followed them all over New York, from Manhattan to the Bronx. She continued to travel around New York City to evade her husband's persistent pursuit. Raquel, only 7 at the time, witnessed the abuse and threats, as did Hector Jr., who was very protective of his mother, so he began hitting his father back to protect her, and he would plead, "Don't hit mummy, don't hit mummy," but he could not stop the physical abuse.
Terrible start for Hector, and many have suggested that Hector Jr. began street fighting from the age of 5 around this time, and Raquel remembered that Macho was always macho, lovable, crazy, always crazy. It didn't surprise me that he had become a boxer because the little boy was in trouble since he was born. We knew he was going to be something. And the family eventually settled in northeastern Manhattan. now known as Spanish Harlem, or El Barrio, in an apartment in James Weldon Johnson houses on the 112th Street between 2nd and 3rd Avenue. However, Hector Sr.'s persistence never failed, so he managed to wrangle himself back into the family home. Then they gave birth to their third child, Felix, who everybody would call Boo Boo. Now, Maria hoped that Hector Sr. would change, as a lot of these women do, but her family thought she was stupid to even allow him back into their lives. And she recalled that my family was mad with me because I would leave Hector Sr. and then come back to him. But I had no money for the kids. The family could see there would be no change, but Maria hoped he would. And Raquel said that we saw what was happening with our own eyes, and we used to try to save our mother, but he used to push us to the ground or down to the ground, so we could not intervene. At other times, my mother used to put us under the bed and in the closet so we wouldn't see these things. We had to get on welfare because he didn't want to support us. Maria backed up her daughter's claims as well, and she said, I put Macho in a box under the bed. I didn't want him seeing anything. He was scared. He said, Mummy, don't go back to him. Please don't go back to him. He's going to hurt you.
A very difficult upbringing, very difficult start for Hector Macho Camacho. Now, thankfully, before any more violence could escalate, Maria and Hector Sr. split. At first, her brother would be a great help, and Raquel said, we always had my uncle, Julio. We always had uncles and cousins who would look out for me and my mum. Maria eventually met a new man in the early 1970s, Alejandro Oliveras, aka Ruben. When Ruben moved in with the family, it began to get easier, and they would go on to have two more children, Estrella and Esther. Maria now felt safe and secure and said, I was alone, and he started to help me with the kids. Hector would look at me and say, Mummy, I like him. He's going to be my father. He's better than my father. I want us to live with him. Even Raquel approved and said, when Ruben came, he was like a father figure. He took care of us. Now, despite the dreadful domestic violence, Raquel has pleasant memories of her childhood. And she said, we didn't really miss much. We had a good childhood. We were poor, and my mother was suffering by herself, but we, me and Match, had a good childhood. Maria began working at KFC in the Bronx, and Hector Jr. would always be with her for the whole shift, Maria recalled. They looked at me and said, Maria Camacho, your son can't stay here all day. And she would request, Tito, please go home. But he was adamant. No, Mummy, I will stay right here. I will stay and watch you because somebody can do something to you. Maria would reassure him. Nobody can do anything to me. I'm working for you, Tito. The money I am making is for you. Her response fell on deaf ears. I don't care, Mummy. I be here for you.
This is quite evident early. He was a mummy's boy. So, like a lost puppy, Hector followed his mother everywhere she went, always promising, Mummy, you're going to be the richest woman in the world because I'm going to buy you a car, a house, and give you money. I swear, all of it for you. You don't need Ruben or anyone else, just me, Mummy. Now, while Hector followed his mother everywhere he could, she got a second job and he was too far away, so he couldn't follow her. And Raquel actually remembered her mother's hard work fondly as well, with her having two jobs. And she said that we were on welfare, but my mother always took care of us and made sure that there was food on the table. We were always dressed, always clean, and always there was food for us. I didn't need anything, and Match especially didn't need anything. Now, while their mother obviously grafted her ass off to keep her kids' bellies full, Hector Sr. had succumbed to alcoholism, obviously not part of the family, and he was still in the kids' lives, but not obviously Maria's lives. But he now kept more of a distance and lacked the ability to give his children affection. Obviously, they obviously lost that affection for him beating their mother. Now, therefore, once again, Maria would step up and show double the amount of affection to make up for their deadbeat dad's non-existence. Now, meanwhile, Hector Jr. continued to watch over his mother. He had a need to look after her and make sure nobody would ever hurt her again. Even when his mother would tell him to go play and he refused, he would watch her cook and never be too far away. The one person who came in the way of their relationship was the younger son, which was Boo Boo. And Maria recalled that he was jealous of Boo Boo. Hector would say, Mummy, I'm your baby. Boo Boo's not your baby. I said, yes, he is. You are both my babies. Then Hector told her, but I love you more than Boo Boo, Mum. I would tell him he couldn't love me more than Boo Boo because, well, I love you both the same. So yeah, I think you just get in the situation in between their relationship. He obviously Dalton just loved his mum so much, didn't want her to get hurt at this very young age.
Eventually, Maria enrolled Hector into classes at the boys' club on East 111th Street, and she recalled his first icon. He always asked me, Mummy, buy me the clothes, buy me the picture, so I had to put him in karate because he had to be Bruce Lee. Like many of the kids in Spanish Harlem, which interestingly was about 80 blocks north of Madison Square Garden, Hector would spend his afternoons in the Cosmo Theatre watching Bruce Lee films. The martial arts superstar rubbed off on him so much that he promised to one day be able to buy his famous yellow and black outfit. Hector didn't start school until he was in the 4th grade. He attended a Catholic school located in the heart of Spanish Harlem called Commander John J. Shea. He found it difficult to settle in because he didn't speak any English. Culturally, he didn't fit in and he was dressed in hand-me-down clothes. The one thing he did have was the ability to handle himself. Austin Fenner, a former classmate, remembered, Hector comes in and no one knows him. He became the toughest of them all in this room of tough kids. He was clearly the best fighter. And Austin would know because on Hector's first day, he challenged the new kid to a fight to see how tough he was, and he said, there was no better way to win a friend than fight him on the first day of school. I was thinking, he's a nobody. I would take him on. I will fight him. Seconds later, at the back of the school, whap, a jab, whap, move to his right, whap, back to the left, whap. I got my hands up and he's busy jabbing me. No hooks, nothing, just jabs, pop, pop, pop. I was like, what's happening?
Well, Austin continued with his story and he said, he went for the weak spot. I was thinking, this is not how this was supposed to go. I was bigger. My clothes fit me right. I had a hard-working dad, but I was still standing there, whap, 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 whap. It was an educated jab. Tired of taking this constant beating, Austin eventually quit. And he said, it was my form of surrender. He said, you win. And Hector recalled to a boxing reporter, sort of later on in his life, he said, when I was about 10, I was into martial arts and I went to a lot of Bruce Lee pictures, so cinemas. He was my idol. I thought I was big and bad, so I stuck with fighting and went to the gym. I ran around the streets looking for fights. Now, Austin said that Hector would emulate his hero, Bruce Lee, better than anybody else. He said a guy like Bruce Lee was everything if you were a kid in Spanish Harlem. He represented swag and he could fight his ass off. Every kid in Spanish Harlem cut broomsticks into sticks and used nails to make nunchuckers, if people don't know nunchucks. And they were all out there doing the Bruce Lee nunchuck move. The flash, the ability, hiya, however they do it. No one embraced that better than Hector. No one exemplified the flash of Bruce Lee like Hector did. When Hector was around 9-10 years old, his sister Raquel recalled that he used to break up the sticks, the mops, the brooms to use for nunchucks. There was never none available. She then said we got so tired of him beating us up that my mum actually put him all in the garage when he started to think he was Bruce Lee. You know, just get him away from the kids because basically he's making his nunchuckers and beating up his brothers and sisters. The skills he had acquired though from karate actually helped Hector establish himself as a known street fighter, and it was around the time that he met a neighborhood tough guy, the guy that everyone knew and called as Dirt, in an area that was also called Big Swings.
Now, going back to Austin Fenner, he reminisced, everyone knew who Hector was, and everyone knew Dirt. You knew everyone, and everyone knew you. No one wanted to fight Dirt. This would not just be a fight between two kids on the street. This was a fight in Spanish Harlem, and boy did the streets pay attention. Austin recalled, people came from the handball courts, guys came from the corner and the other side of the Jefferson projects. Soon the whole neighbourhood was watching the fight. Kids were climbing the fences to get a bird's eye view. The fight between Hector and Dirt would be forever remembered on the streets of Spanish Harlem, even though there was no winner. But what Hector did show to everyone watching was that he never backed down from the toughest street kid in the area. He demonstrated speed and refused to be bullied. Hector's persistent street fights would give him a nickname, and Hector recalled, "People used to call me Little Man around the street. I was always looking for excitement to fight and always in the boys' club trying to beat on bigger kids just to get a reputation as a fighter." Eventually, it was the persistent fighting that got Hector thrown out of many schools, and he said, "I was thrown out of 6 schools, visited 6 psychiatrists, and they never found anything crazy in me." Maria recalled, "Every day I would get a call from the office. Mrs. Camacho, come right now. Hector had a fight with a girl. A big girl started to bother him, so he punched her in the teeth and took her teeth out." Now, although Hector loved to fight, he never felt like he was a troublemaker. He fought kids that deserved to get beat up, and he said, "I wasn't really a bad kind of guy. Like I wanted to hurt people. It was just with adventures."
Here you go. This is the early 1970s when Hector became good friends with other guys in the neighborhood, and two brothers in particular was Eddie and Casey Prats, whose love for lucha libre wrestling, it's the Mexican wrestling, I'm sure it is, was rubbing off on them there. And they all three actually created their own wrestling masks. And like many kids, they would pretend to do their favorite wrestling moves and practice their favorite start all the stuff they do. You know, everyone, we done it when we were kids, sure, WWF. So like many friendships, they had a falling out, which started when the brothers began taking the mick out of another boy for having big ears. Now, the boy's dad was the local barber, and he knew that Hector had a reputation as a tough kid, so he offered him money to sort his own 2 friends out. Well, Hector accepted, and he punched Casey in the face. The brothers returned to their mum and told her what happened, and Eddie recounted what their mum said, and she said she looked at them both of us and said, "You're going down there to fight him right now." We go down to the barber shop, and Camacho was there collecting his money. They did not want to fight Hector. Of course, nobody did. But due to their mother's persistence, they had no choice. And Eddie said that Casey was not about to do anything. My mum is there yelling, "Hit him, hit him." And my brother is like, "I can't, Ma. He wouldn't stay still. He's too fast." I watched the fight, and Hector again jabbing away and moving like he's already developed into a fighter. He was born to fight. There was just something inside of him. He loved to fight, and it didn't matter if you were his friend or not. Not only was Hector not afraid to fight his friends, but Maria also became tired of him continually beating up his brothers and sisters. So she decided that boxing might be the answer, a disciplined sport that might help reduce his street fighting and encourage him to fight legally in the ring instead.
Ruben had already showed him some punching techniques, and because he already excelled in one-on-one combat sport, it worked a treat. And after just one session, Hector returned home and told Maria, "Oh, Mummy, I like that. So I'm going to leave the karate and go into boxing." "You like the boxing, Mummy?" he asked. "Yes, sweetheart," Maria replied. "Okay, I will go into boxing." Although boxing was good for Hector, he never really had anyone who would take the time to nurture his talent, so street life would always be more profitable and rewarding. He had many friends from the streets, but his 2 closest were Gilbert Trio Cuevas and Edwin Eddie Gonzalez. Aside from them 2, he had another good friend who always stayed loyal to him, Richie, known as Rich Gavilan, who lived in the Johnson Projects, and he recalled, "If you needed Hector to protect you, he would always fight your battles. He would never stand down to nobody. One time, he was playing basketball with us, and this big black guy fouls Hector. The guy started to pick on Hector because he was smaller. Sent in a fight, Hector went home and got his boxing boots. The guy was a bully. Hector would beat him up." Even at this young age, many of his friends were heading to prison or the grave, but Hector managed to use his charisma, cheeky smile, or whack to the head to keep him out of serious trouble. By 14, he began dating 17-year-old Maida Olivio, nicknamed China, and he became instantly infatuated with her. Maida was a member of the East Side Gang, also a boxer and a street fighter, and their relationship blossomed while training at the same gym.
Well, it was after those training sessions that they would walk home together, and Hector would promise her luxurious gifts once he made it big time like he did with his mother. And Maida said that, "I was attracted to him because he was a boxer. He exercised all the time, which I loved because I was a jogger myself. Also, he was good looking, and he reminded me of Rocky Balboa." Maida also recalled the moments they attended the gym, and she said that for martial arts, we both went to the boys' club together, which was located on 111th Street between the First and Second Avenue. Hector was put in an upstairs martial arts program, and I was put in the girls' cadets program downstairs. And the boys' club was a place to keep the youth out of trouble and physically busy at all times. There were many gangs around Spanish Harlem around this time, and Hector was associated with a gang called the Jefferson Crusaders, more of a neighborhood watch group, though, that hang out in the Jefferson projects. And a former member of the Crusaders said that when he was young, Hector would get into street fights and whip ass. If he had a misunderstanding or had to defend our turf, Hector got involved and someone got hurt. Hector was the best of everything in our neighborhood, and we all looked up to him. Now, while he had earned this reputation on the streets, he was not that polished article in the ring, although he showed excellent hand speed and a brilliant understanding of combination punching. And Maida said for boxing, Hector first trained in Negro's gym on 108th Street and Park Avenue, which was located in the projects down the ramp. I went to the gym for exercise and boxing, but mostly to watch Hector train. When Hector started, Negro deeply cared for him. He was a good man, and he would tell Hector, one day you will be somebody.
Where he lacked in school education, his classroom was the streets, and he was able to stand out better than most. His sense of humour, hyperactiveness and light-heartedness made it easy for him to be liked, and Maida said, the same things that endeared him to the fans also attracted me. He made me and everyone around him laugh. He was constantly joking. He was definitely a clown. Hector was sent to Manhattan High School, a school for troubled youths. While there, he met Patrick Flannery, an English teacher who would become a significant role model for Hector, and he recalled the moment they met. The first time he, as in Hector, entered my class, he jumped to my desk, grabbed my window opening pole, and vaulted to the front of the room. He started shadowboxing and pretending he was on television. It was like, Camacho throws a left, Camacho throws a right, he's down. He acted as if he had knocked himself down, then jumped up and turned to me smiling and waving his fists. Mr. Flannery scooped up Hector and threw him against the wall to restore order, and he also gained Camacho's respect. Hector told Sports Illustrated in 1983, Patrick's always been a father to me. He's always taken care of me, fed me. He's the one who's always there to advise me. He loves me like a son. After getting kicked out of yet another school, Maria decided to homeschool him and asked Mr. Flannery to teach reading and writing at the house from 8 a.m. till 3 p.m. He was the only male that could get through to Hector, and he would tell him, if you can't read, then how will you read about yourself when you're famous? It would be Mr. Flannery that gave Hector Camacho his nickname Macho, but we'll come to that a little bit later on.
Well, Hector described what it meant to be macho when he told the Sunday News magazine in 1983 that I'd been out on these streets since I was 7 or 8 years old. The kids now think they're hard rocks and fly guys, but they don't know, they don't remember the real East Side gangs. I was called macho because I thought I was crazy, but the real crazies, they are either dead or doing life. The real macho men are in their own world, getting high, then busting out once in a while when their feelings build up. So he's basically saying he's macho, but yet he's not as macho as some of those the other guys out on the street. And Flannery was the guy that would teach Hector some much needed life skills, but he also needed someone to help him on the one-to-one basis so he could progress his boxing skills. Now, after his stepdad Ruben had taken him to the La Sombra Sporting Club, formerly Negro's gym, Negro Gonzalez and another trainer, Mickey Rosario, were unable to concentrate on him solely. So to help Hector learn the art of the sport on a more consistent basis, one man stepped to the plate, Bobby Lee Valles, aka Robert Lee. Their relationship worked because he understood Hector's current situation, being a former gang member himself, but he also was an excellent amateur fighter, boxer back in the day himself. Now, he had a very, very strong reputation in the neighborhood. And he said at the time I was dating Negra, which was Maria's, Hector's mother's half sister, she wanted me to take a look at her nephew as a fighter. When he came down to the gym, I was moving to other fighters when she said, "Here he is. Here's the kid I was telling you about. That's my nephew." Robert Lee said, after seeing Hector when he was 13 years old, he said that I fought for him. I wanted him to have a shot. So he stood by him and wanted to develop him. And Lee was never given much support himself when he was a kid from the street. So he knew what it would take to progress Hector to the next stage of in boxing.
He convinced him to move from his current gym to Jimmy Glenn's Times Square gym, opened by Jimmy Ellis and Bobby Gleason's gym on West 30th Street, understanding that the level of sparring and being in a higher level environment would be the catalyst to progress Hector. Lee said, "I saw something different in him, someone who really was in need of help. He needed my attention. You know, people didn't want to give him a shot. They said he wasn't worth it, that he was buck wild, but I saw affection and curiosity." Maria was happy for another male role model in Hector's life, whether it be Ruben Olivares or Patrick Flannery or even Robert Lee. They all played a different role, but were all guiding him in the same direction. For instance, when Hector got arrested, Lee would bail him out. When Hector allowed the streets to pull him back in, Lee would smack him across the face to straighten him out. At first, Maria wasn't pleased with his approach, but soon had a change of heart, and she said, Robert was strong and direct with Macho, but he needed someone like that because he was strong too. Robert Lee used to care for him and look out for him. If Hector hung out on the benches, Robert Lee would say, "Go train or go home, don't hang out here." And then he used to slap him. Robert was strong, but in a positive way. Lee would even intervene when he witnessed Hector in street fights and said, "I watched him and another kid duke it out in the streets. I would take a rope, tie it against a chair or a tree, and then say, 'Now you can fight.' I knew anything goes in the streets, so I stopped playing chess and got the gloves and set it up for them."
When Hector would resort back to his street life, it would be Lee who would often find him, and his friends, this is Lee saying that, so his friends would all hide under a park bench, and I would make them get up. I would tell him we're going home. He was pissed off at me. I would walk him home. While moving between gyms, Lee was able to get vital sparring for Hector. And you're talking vital. I mean, this is now he's sort of moving into his teens here, but how about this for some vital sparring? Hector against professionals like Terence Ali, Howard Davis Jr., Ray Mancini, and even the great Roberto Duran. And Lee described what happened between Hector and Duran. And he said, I put him in with Roberto Duran, and he was too fast for him. Hector would not stand still. He had such fast hands and legs. But after 3 rounds, I took him out. Duran's trainer, Freddie Brown, was angry with me because he wanted me to leave him in there. Duran wanted to get off, but he couldn't. After the last round, I said, "See you later, Freddie. My guy is just an amateur." And they wanted to let him open up more, but I wouldn't allow it. So as soon as he got to those 3 rounds, and Duran wanted to cave his head in, he moved him out quickly. And Hector recalled that I wanted to be like Bruce Lee, but I never wanted to be like Duran in style. When I watched him, I said, wow, but I never wanted to be mean like that. Later, Lee told Hector that you keep practicing and you will bypass all the professional fighters in the gym. Those sparring sessions were also about resolve and being able to take punches by men who had been there, done it, worn the t-shirt. So Hector wasn't much of a runner when he first started on the streets. Hector was happy to stand toe-to-toe with anybody. But it was Lee who turned him into a boxer who could move. And Lee would tell him, the only time you stand still is when you want to set it up or set them up. Pivot, sidestep, and then crack.
Before Hector moved into the amateur game, Lee brought in a local trainer, Billy Giles, to work with his young prospect. He then explained his boxing education with unlicensed fights called smokers because spectators smoked in the venue as they watched the fights. Eventually, the illegal shows got shut down, but it was a useful education for Hector, who was now ready to move on to the amateur scene. However, his bright future and positive guidance from the people around him could not keep him off the streets, and he would return to old habits. Hector continued street fighting with his gang, but also moved on to petty crimes such as stealing cars and mugging people. One of Hector's childhood friends, Ruby Gonzalez, recalled a night out with Hector, and he said, one night he showed up driving a car and he said, "Come on, let's go for a ride," only to find out that we were going to White Castle. And we had a great evening. I said, "Bro, "Whose car is this?" he said. "I just stole it for the night, Rocco. I'll call you tomorrow." Now, while Hector was on probation for a previous carjacking, which he denied, a friend from the block dared him to steal a car. Without any hesitation, Hector and his friend accepted, but while in the process of stealing the car, things got messy, and Hector's friend stabbed the driver. What was supposed to be a fun joyride turned into a police chase covering 30 blocks. Hector was eventually cornered by police officers inside a building after he tried to continue his escape on foot. When they arrested Hector, his head was split open with the butt of a gun. Hector expected the worst, but the judge gave him 6 months for grand theft auto, and he was sent to Rikers Island.
This is a massive turning point for Hector. There's a few in his life, but this is a big turning point. So if things couldn't get any worse, they did when Hector, aged 16, was placed in solitary confinement for more fighting. There were many who took credit for getting Hector out. Hector finally released from Rikers Island. And Maria says that Negro Gonzalez actually helped put up the money to get him out of the prison. Robert Lee said he signed the papers to get him out with the help of his friend Big George Hankins. And he said, "I signed him out of Rikers. I signed papers and then released him under my custody. No one else did it. I had promised him I would get him out. It was rough in there. I went to court and battled for him to get out, and none of his family did anything." Well, Maria's obviously story conflicts that, and she said that she recalled that she, along with Lee and Ruben, were part of a team to get Hector released from Rikers after he served 3.5 months. He didn't do the full 6, but he had it tough in there. It was a real learning curve, and it was pretty irrelevant, to be fair, who got him out, but he did get out, because when Hector returned home, his mother discovered while in Rikers, he'd actually picked up a drug problem. Now, one night, while he was snorting cocaine in the bathroom, Maria burst in, grabbed the coke from him and flushed it down the toilet. And Maria recalled, he said, "There go my mummy. You know how much that cost?" She said, "I don't care. Your life costs more than that," replied Maria. Now, like many young kids living in poverty, Hector had fallen victim to the drug culture, but he never completely allowed the drugs or violent society to actually consume him too much like the other kids and other wasted talent that never fulfilled their potentials. Now, after the incident with his mother, Hector decided he wanted to box. In the March 1978 Golden Gloves tournament at the 112 pound sub-novice division, and Lee Giles and a reluctant Flannery actually assisted Hector to grant him his wish.
And Flannery told Sports Illustrated in 1983, "When he made up his mind to fight in the Golden Gloves, I did everything I could to discourage him, but when I saw how determined he was, I gave him my boxing shoes and I helped him fill out the forms." Not only had Lee taught Hector how to be more technical in the ring, and Giles showed Hector how to be more ruthless, which helped him become more successful in the Golden Gloves. His southpaw stance and blistering hand speed, well, it was too much for many of his opponents. Hector won his first of 3 New York Golden Gloves championships in the 1978 sub-novice tournament at 118 pounds. With stardom beckoning, Lee became more observant of Hector's social life because he didn't want him to ruin his potential. So after his Golden Gloves victory, a disobedient Hector snuck out one night to be with his street friends. Lee found him and brought him back home, then collected all of his shoes and confiscated them to teach him a lesson and to keep him from going back outside. That plan still couldn't keep Hector off the streets. Instead, he wore Raquel's shoes to go out. Now, Maria was grateful to Lee, and she said, "I liked that he did that. Hector was supposed to be in the gym. He shouldn't have been out on the streets. I told Lee to take everything, so Hector don't run into those streets." Before Hector finally turned over to the professional ranks, Maida fell pregnant. Both families pulled together and the young couple moved into Hector's family home. Maria was able to keep food on the table for the whole family and look after her son's girlfriend while he pursued his career in boxing.
This didn't last very long. She eventually moved back to her mum's and made her explain why. She said, "There were a lot of girls. He liked a lot of girls, a womanizer. I saw him with a girl when I was pregnant, and it was a big problem." So during the pregnancy, Hector continued with his crimes, ending up in court for stealing a car again. Now, while at the hearing, Maida was actually sitting with Maria and actually started to experience labour pains and was actually taken away in an ambulance. The judge, seeing that, let Hector go home, and Maida said that he just didn't realise how his actions impacted on me. Then on September the 20th, 1978, Hector Macho Matías Jr. was born, and Hector Sr. was over the moon. And now that he's the new senior, Maida remembered that he was in his element and his world changed forever. He ran with excitement to tell the world he had a baby boy. He was a proud dad, and the world knew it. Well, the young couple tried to make a go of it. So they moved into their own apartment together, but their relationship had lost its spark, so they soon split up. Eventually, the families would continue to work together and look after Hector Jr. while Macho concentrated on his boxing career. As with many successful sportsmen, sacrifices had to be made if you want to progress into the next level in any sport. And undoubtedly, spending valuable time away from without your child and your children, they're limited. It's just you just don't get to see your kids if you want to pursue this career. But the love and affection he had for his son was never ever in doubt. Anyone that you ever ask, his love for his son was just he loved him so much. And Hector won with that in mind, he goes on and he wins 3 consecutive Golden Gloves titles, 4 Intercity titles, 2 Empire State Games championships, a Spanish Gloves title, and 13 total amateur titles from 1979 to 1980 in the 118-pound division. This kid was special. There's no doubt about it. Hector Camacho completed his amateur career fighting 100 times, winning 96 of those and losing 4. And undoubtedly, those 4 fights, some say, weren't really losses.
His success was described by the former New York Post journalist Michael Marley, who said Hector was the best amateur of his generation out of New York. He had smoker fights and then won 3 Golden Gloves titles back-to-back when the gloves were very competitive. During this time, Hector developed close friendships with 2 other fighters, Davey Moore and Alex Ramos, who had both won multiple Golden Gloves titles. Often, their gyms would square off against each other, and Ramos recalled, "He was a beautiful soul, but you didn't want to fuck with him. He didn't take shit from anybody. You get on his bad side, he lets you know what's happening." I remember when Hector started a riot at the Apollo gym on 125th Street. He got into an argument and went nuts. I was downstairs, he was upstairs. It was just over some bullshit. Hector dreamed of going to the Moscow Olympics in 1980, fighting at the 120-pound weight limit. However, his dream was ended after progressing through to the semi-finals of the trials. He lost to Irvin Mitchell. Never one to be downbeat, Hector saw the brighter side of the disappointment. He could turn professional earlier and make money sooner. On September the 12th, 1980, 8 days before Hector Jr.'s second birthday, Hector Camacho weighed in at 127 pounds and won a 4-round unanimous decision in his professional debut in the super featherweight division against David Brown at the Felt Forum, located in Madison Square Garden. He made the transition from the amateurs to professional ranks look pretty easy, and Flannery explained why he chose Hector's nickname and the reception he got in his debut, and he said his friends were going to call him Payaso, which means clown in Spanish. I named him Macho. The rhyme is something everybody won't forget. He used it in his first professional fight against David Brown at the Felt Forum. He was introduced as Macho Camacho, and the audience went wild. It's a name that suits him perfectly.
It's a great name, Macho Camacho. Hector Macho Camacho. It just rolls off your tongue, doesn't it? Great bit of advice there from Flannery. And Hector's team was now growing. So you had Billy Giles and Robert Lee, who shared the training, and managing duties fell to Jerry Villarreal Sr. and his son, Jerry Villarreal Jr., who was actually learning the ropes from his dad while he was still at school as well. And then they will stick with him pretty much all the way through. So Tony Kidd there's another guy who was on office duty. Giles later hired a guy called Don Thibodeau from Detroit as Hector's cutman. The team also included Hector's stablemate and close friend from the amateurs, Pee Wee Rucker, and later Long Island promoter Jeff Levine would join the Macho team as a co-promoter and manager. He would play a vital role in negotiating a lucrative future for Hector, who it involved a certain Mr. Slippery, Don King, who eventually steps into this. Laura Levine said that my father loved Hector dearly, wild and all. So before Hector would become world champion, Levine actually signed with King with a world title fight being the end goal. So that was always there of it, like every fighter. Now, King actually promised Hector a new car as part of his bonus, and Hector demanded that he wanted a Lamborghini. Now, although Hector was destined to be a world champion, he was some way off that yet. And in the meantime, sparring in New York was limited. To keep Hector improving, they sent him and Pee Wee Rucker out to Detroit to begin working in the famous Kronk gym. It was through Giles, who had a relationship with Emmanuel Stewart, that this actually came about. And Jerry Villarreal Sr. recalled that at the time, the Kronk was the hottest gym around. So Hector was getting all that work over there and kicking everybody's ass, every Kronk guy around. One guy that Hector beat around the ring was a guy called Hilmer Kenty. He was then the WBC World Lightweight Champion. And Jerry Sr. recalled that Hector beat him like he stole something. But it was Jerry Jr. who had actually enlightened his dad on Hector. And he recalled that I remember talking to my dad and telling him, you have to come and see this little Southpaw Puerto Rican kid. He just kicked the shit out of Hilmer Kenty.
Hilmer was pissed, and Jerry Jr. recounted Kenty saying, "That's bullshit. We'll do it again tomorrow." And then the next day, when I get to the gym, Hilmer is waiting for Hector with his gloves on and said, "Let's go, let's go." Hector tagged Kenty after some feeling out rounds, but pulled back when he saw that Kenty was hurt. "Are you okay?" he asked. Immediately, Giles reprimanded Hector for not going for the kill. Unusual for Hector, who was known to be ruthless in the sparring. Jerry Jr. recalled, Hector beat the shit out of him again. He was 17 years old. Kenty never sparred with him again after that. There was another sparring story that happened in Cutman Don Thibodeau's own gym. One afternoon, Tommy Hearns' younger brother John challenged Hector to spar. Tommy got wind of the showdown, rushed over to the gym and demanded his brother leave, saying, "You have no business getting in the ring with him," pointing to Hector. "Go get your stuff and we can go home." Hector then apparently joked to Tommy, "If he doesn't want to fight, I can always take you." Unfortunately, Tommy never accepted that challenge. What a hell of a sparring session that would have been.
Wow.
Now, from September 1980 to September 1981, Hector reeled off 10 straight victories, stopping 6, and a half of those contests were at the Felt Forum, where he generated a lot of interest. His win over Kato Ali caught the eye of Gil Clancy, who was so impressed with the young kid that he approached the Garden's matchmaker, Harold Weston, about putting him on CBS television. Weston recalled, "Gil Clancy worked at CBS and he gave me his approval of Camacho after seeing him at the Garden. Gil thought he could be great, and for you to get Gil's attention, Gil doesn't just say that about anybody. When you get it from those types of guys, like the Dundees and Gil, that means you can fight."
Sure was. His rise is quite quick here, actually, and it was no surprise that Hector became a hit on television so early in his career because, quite simply, he was brilliant to watch. You only need to just go back onto YouTube to see why fans flocked to the forum to watch this flamboyant teenager with rapid hand speed. Not only were his hands ridiculously fast, but the way he was able to switch the angles and turn his opponent with ease really is beautiful to watch. And, we can't recommend you high enough to go back and have a look. And Teddy Atlas was in such awe of his jab. He was so in awe of Hector's jab that he actually named it himself. And this is what he said. He said he invented his own jab and I called it the trip hammer. I mean, Teddy Atlas has just called and it just made a jab up. It's insane. So after only 11 bouts, Hector earned a shot to face the tough Filipino fighter Blaine Dixon, 15-3 for the North American Boxing Federation in the ABF Super Featherweight title on December 11, 1981. This was the first real acid test scheduled for a first 10-rounder, and after some hairy moments, he took a unanimous decision and he won his first title. Not well told, but it's a significant title. The fight will be better remembered for what happened in the final round as Hector continued to punch after the final bell sounded. And amid the chaos, Hector punched the referee, Vinny Rainone, in the face. Hector admitted after the fight that I lost my head. I really didn't think he would come back at me. A possible reason for this outburst may come from the unrest that had now developed within camp. And Jerry Villarreal Sr. explained that we were getting ready to fight Blaine Dixon. Robert Lee had access to Hector's account and took $5,000. He made the mistake of confiding in Billy Giles about taking the money, which he could have easily paid back after the fight. Billy went directly to Maria and said something like, "If he takes $5,000 now, what's next?" When Robert signed the contract, Billy promised to give him his share of 33.5%, but he never did. Robert should have gone directly to Hector and could have gotten the money, but he didn't. They let him go.
Well, Robert Lee told a different story, and he said Billy had started taking advantage of different things. I had the bank book with the money short, but I was going to replace the money with the TV fight. In reality, I was entitled to what I took, but I was not as focused as I should have been. Hector believed in me all this time. Why second guess me now? I never cut his purse. They made it look so ugly. It hurt my pride. When asked about Lee, Hector told a reporter, Lee's no longer with me because of something he did to himself. I don't mind saying it because really, it isn't hurting me. He's wrong, and he isn't right for the business. The friendship is still there, but as far as business-wise, he isn't right for it. So, I just dismissed him. I said thanks for all the favours he did, and the friendship is always there. One day he might feel bad, and I don't want him to look at me and say, hey, I made the kid, he's making money and now he's going around bad-mouthing me. So with Lee out of the picture, come March 1982, Hector took on Rafael Lopez back at the Felt Forum. Early in the third, he used a brief respite during a break issued by the referee Luis Rivera to knock Lopez out with a right hand, which took Lopez 10 minutes to recover from. Angered by the knockout, Lopez pleaded, just let me get him again. Mystified by the controversy, Hector said, they say we can't punch. Well, I guess that was a pretty good punch. Hector had built a good relationship with Harold Weston now, who was an excellent influence in Hector's rise through the ranks. It was around this time that Hector was involved in a street fight. When Weston found out, he took matters into his own hands.
And this is what Weston explained. He said he was a natural. But one time I found out that he had got into a street fight and beat up a couple of guys. I had him come to my office and I shut the door. I punched him in the stomach. He looked at me like, what the fuck are you doing? But I didn't tolerate that. I was trying to help these guys. He knew I cared and I knew where he came from. He was a good kid. Even with a promising career ahead of him, Hector always seemed to keep finding himself in trouble. And he described one of his run-ins. He said, I beat up this guy and then he come back acting like he had a gun. I went upstairs and got his sawed-off shotgun. I chased him through the streets with the shotgun. I just did so much crazy stuff. Well, back to the ring, and in May 1982, Refugio Rojas was supposed to be the man to test Hector to his limits because of who he had fought and lost to. He fought hard opposition in the super featherweight division, the likes of Rolando Navarrete, Edwin Rosario, Rocky Lockridge, and Bernard Taylor. The fight was Hector's first defense of the NABF title, and he stopped him in the first round due to the 3-time knockdown rule. By now, Weston was actually negotiating with all the biggest television networks around, which was CBS, ABC, and NBC, literally trying to get the biggest payday for Hector. CBS, well, they must have offered the most because they aired the fight with Louis Loy, who was undefeated 15-0 at the Felt Forum. This was not an easy fight for Hector, where he had to use dirty tactics to get himself out of trouble. Hector told CBS analyst Tim Ryan after the 7th round stoppage, Loy has never seen anything like my quality. I knew it was going to be this type of fight because, first of all, I don't like to get hit.
When asked about his dirty tactics, Hector responded, it's like a habit. I have to break out of it. Loy countered by saying, he never hurt me. He's also a dirty fighter. If he did that spinning out in California, he would have never gotten away with it. He's a quick puncher, real fast, but if I hit him, like he hit me, he would have been gone. Hector demonstrated dirty tactics, but he also showcased some outstanding boxing skills, so much so that Sugar Ray Leonard said, I remember watching this kid with super fast hands who was incredible in the ring, and I said to myself, this kid is going to be a superstar. I knew this kid was going to be special, and he turned out to be a special fighter. By this point, many compared Hector with Leonard. His footwork, hand speed and charisma was definitely there for all to see. Next up was Johnny Sato at a catchweight at the Sands Casino in Atlantic City, and Hector impressed with his 11th knockout victory in 16 fights. Afterwards, Hector described the knockdown as, "I was flicking the jab, trying to stagger him. I hit him with the hook fist and the uppercut finished him off. I mean, I'm really mean," he said with his cheeky smile. Now ranked in the top 10 in many people's eyes, although not with the WBA, just as poor then as they are today, Hector was actually on the verge of a world title shot. In October and November of 1982, Hector took two 10-round unanimous decision victories over two undefeated fighters in Melvin Paul and Greg Coverson in Atlantic City and Las Vegas respectively. The next fight would be in the lightweight division against John Montez, who was 22-1, and his only actual defeat came against a certain Hill McKenty. CBS decided to take the fight to one of the most unusual places for a boxing match, Alaska.
Unbelievable. So something happens here, and it's important, really. And we're going to let the CBS analyst, Tim Ryan, who actually built quite a good relationship with Hector during this point, and he explained what happened the night before the fight. He said, "We got a call in our hotel room from one of his handlers who was in great distress. You got to come over here. He's trying to jump out of the window. He was completely out of his mind drug-wise. We talked him out of it, come down, and they got him out of danger." Then the concern was, how is he going to be come fight time? The next day, you wouldn't have even known anything had happened. And it's crazy. Gil Glartzy was also the other guy. So Tim Ryan and Gil, they both helped. Gil apparently really did help get him away from the balcony and jumping. Well, Hector performed as well as he ever had, and he stopped Mantis in the very first round. And Tim Ryan reflected. He said, "We were grateful for the fact that he had recovered and the fight went on, but it was a source of great concern to us from that point forward because we knew he was dealing with some demons." Well, after the fight, Jerry Villarreal Jr. said that Billy Giles went over and punched their manager in the face. But to Billy's credit, apparently he deserved it. That's what he said. Now, while staying at a Holiday Inn in Michigan, Hector's Cadillac Eldorado was stolen. This is another moment, something that happens around this time. He then noticed that his Corvette was now being broken into outside the hotel room as well. So Jerry Villarreal Sr. explained what happened next. And he says, "Tito was there. Hector comes running out of the hotel in Speedo underwear with these guys trying to take his Corvette. So Hector and Tito get in the car and chase these guys into Southwest Detroit. They're running stop signs. Next thing I know, I see Tito on the side of the road. Hector told him to tell the cops he was in hot pursuit of the criminals. While Hector's in hot pursuit, he hits a car and wrecks his Corvette."
Jerry Sr. said, "When I get there, Hector is sitting on the side with his Corvette. They take him to jail in his Speedo underwear with no ID. When I get to the station with Tony Kidd, Hector is sitting on top of the desk in his underwear, holding court, promising the cops, if you guys come to New York, I'll give you tickets to the fight." Now, Hector's next fight was a narrow points victory over the undefeated Arelis Perez, where he collected $150,000 before finally getting his world title shot on August the 7th, 1983, against the WBC number 3 ranked fighter from Mexico, Rafael Lemon. Rafael Solis was the WBC number 2 ranked fighter, but he accepted $150,000 in step-aside money after Bobby Chicon was stripped of the title. The fight was held in San Juan, Puerto Rico, just a few miles from where Hector was born, and it was for the WBC Super Featherweight Championship. Richard Steele officiated the fight, which was promoted by Don King, and Hector did not disappoint the thousands of Puerto Ricans that came out to see him. It was a one-sided mauling against an over-the-hill Limon, which ended in the 5th round. After the fight, Hector said, "I keep telling you, I'm going to be a 3-time world champion because I'm the macho man and I'm dominating the game. It's my time. Macho time." Hector, aged 20, who was born in Puerto Rico but raised in Spanish Harlem, now had the full backing of the Puerto Rican people. He was now their champion, just as much as he was for the people back home in Harlem. Puerto Rican legend Jose Torres explained what it meant to fight the Hispanic way when he wrote, The Hispanic machismo is your capacity to anticipate punches and moves, to have perfect timing and to have the skill to see every incoming punch. And Hector Camacho embodied that against Rafael Lemon.
Great performance, but yeah, Limon was nowhere near the ability we know that he could have, where he was. He was an old man, really. I mean, been in some tough wars, but it was a great performance from Hector. It really was. And Puerto Rican fans placed Hector and his mother in a convertible and paraded him through the city. When they returned to the hotel, hundreds of people waited for the party to begin. Hector stuck to his word. He bought his mum a house, walked the streets of Spanish Harlem as the world champion, and met the President of the United States, Ronald Reagan. If nobody knew of Hector Macho Camacho before the Limon fight, then they sure did now. His dress sense was already flamboyant. And we mentioned it right at the top of the show. He's got so many different outfits. Just go and watch him if you have. I'm sure everyone has. But it was just a complete expression of himself. But it went wilder sort of after this when he became world champion. The costumes he wore to the ring were already outrageous by this point, but it just went off the Richter scale. It really did. And Hector explained it himself. He said, I like Batman. I love Superman, the Lone Ranger, Zorro. You put all those superheroes together, there's nobody like Macho Man. People are just going to sit back and say, wow, it's a dream. For all his exuberance outside the ring, there was no doubt he was real deal inside of it. Giles once said this of Hector. He said, Michelangelo was born to paint pictures. Hector Camacho was born to knock guys out. Great saying that. CBS analyst Tim Ryan said, next to Sugar Ray Leonard and next to Ray Mancini and Alexis Arguello, Hector is potentially as appealing as anyone in the game. He has the personality, the style, and the good looks, and he has the story. Hector responded that, I'm not the next Sugar Ray. I'm the next Macho Man. His first defense, Hector collected $250,000 against Rafael Solis, he should have thought took the step aside money. He's laughing, Solis, loads of money, in the Roberto Clemente Coliseum in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and it was televised on HBO this time as a Don King production as well. Once again, Don King is very much involved now. But before the fight, while in a bar in Puerto Rico, Hector started on Solis, who was surrounded by his hangers-on, his mates, and he actually challenged him to fight there and then.
Jerry Villarreal Sr. recalled, Hector had the biggest pair of balls you have ever seen. He looked like James Dean leaning against a pole or a tree at the time, leaning back with a toothpick in his mouth and telling Solis and his guys that he was going to fuck them up. Come on, you motherfuckers. You brought all these ugly motherfuckers here. You know I'm going to fuck you up in the ring. Tomorrow, I'm going to kick your ass. And these big motherfuckers can't get in to help you. I was like, what the fuck? Can't you see we're outnumbered here? There were like 6 of us and 30 of them. But that was Hector. Now, after knocking out fellow Puerto Rican Solis in the 5th round, Hector's controversial comments in the Merchant HBO interview resonated. And he said, if you walk down the street and show me your money, I'm going to take it. Solis was the home favourite, and Hector was being heckled because he was not seen as a proper Puerto Rican, which hurt his feelings, although he would never admit it. He then went on to say, I'm Puerto Rican, but if you don't want me, I'm macho. Forget it. 7 months later, Billy Giles and Hector would team up for one final bout on May the 20th, 1984, in a new division due to weight concerns, managerial and personal issues. Hector vacated his title with the dream of becoming a 2-weight world champion. Before his first voyage into a new division, Sugar Ray Leonard waxes lyrical and he said, he had that personal radar. In other words, he's in the corner and his opposition is throwing punches at him and he just moves slightly to the left and he slips the punch. Very few fighters have that. It's even hard to articulate what it was. There was a list of guys who had that camera, that videotape in their head. They felt the punch coming.
He's painted those pictures before it was happening. It's an art. It really is, and you do see that. And he's an absolute joy to watch at this point. And Larry Merchant, I mean, he again, we were talking about Ray Leonard saying that. Larry Merchant says, I don't think I've ever seen such a bundle of energy and talent and sheer nerve since Muhammad Ali. I mean, what a great compliment that is. So at the time, Hector still owed Don King 2 more defenses of that title, but because he's moved up now, he wanted to, obviously, he weren't going to be working with King. So King actually confronted him and reacted harshly. He said, I own you. You know, how many times he probably told that to some? You belong to me, motherfucker. Well, apparently Hector, who had signed away all of his endorsements for the promoter, told King to fuck off and left his office. So there you go, Hector standing his ground against even Don King. If Hector, who then felt cornered, relinquished his belt, the contract between King basically immediately became null and void, which it did. So that's why he managed to leave King. He does come back. Hector went on to knock out Raphael Williams in the 7th round in the new division. Hector then hired an attorney, Raymond Bain, to investigate a case that he felt needed to be investigated. And Hector had evidence that Giles had started misappropriating money from Hector's purses to pay his own taxes. Now, enlisting Bain to oversee his finances, Hector was able to trace the money back to Giles. When he got wind of the truth, Hector, hurt, reached out to his mother. He said, Mummy, what should I do? Asked Hector, and stunned, leave him, said Maria. Well, after the three had a heart-to-heart, Giles left the team, but he didn't go quietly. He told the press Hector was drowning in drugs and will never make it back. Giles then alleged financial sort of issues. He said, when he took my money, it was okay. Then he started making money and he didn't want to pay me. He was trying to beat me out of money. Hector actually then went on told the Inside Sports reporter that I've been burned twice. I thought Robert Lee and Giles were honest. I let them take over my business. I didn't know what I was worth then, but I've been through school now. I've learned. I know what to do. It's hard to find sincere people in boxing.
A sentiment that still exists today.
It does. Absolutely.
Hector then told a Boston Globe reporter at one point things couldn't get no worse. Giles got power hungry and Don King and Madison Square Garden didn't want to deal with him, and here I am, on hold. I wanted to fight. I was winning, so why not fight? But I had to dismiss him because of the job he was doing. It hurt. He was like a big brother. The split with Giles affected Hector badly. Jerry Villarreal Jr. recalled, he was hurt and he went into a depression. My mother took care of him. He was supposed to go to New York, but no one knew where he was. He just disappeared. His girlfriend of the time, Keisha, noticed a change in Hector. He needed good friends, and he didn't have that. Around this time, Patrick Flannery moved back to Queens, New York, and he was not around as much. Hector was pretty down. I know about being depressed, and he was depressed. He asked me, are these people around me just for my money? And I was like, yes. But he didn't see it that way. Giles leaving the team was actually positive because there were also rumours that Giles fed Hector's drug obsession instead of trying to stop it. To stay active, Hector sometimes engaged in philanthropic pursuits. At the end of 1984, he then fought an exhibition run by Joe Levine to help raise money for a Soviet Jew being held prisoner. A month later, Hector helped Jimmy Montoya put on a fundraiser in Mexico City for the victims of a natural gas explosion. By 1985, Hector replaced Billy Giles with Jimmy Montoya as the main man in camp.
And Montoya, well, he didn't want Montoya, so he didn't want any surprises before he took this role on. And he told Hector, before I do anything, I want to talk to Billy Giles. Then I called Billy at 3 a.m. and told him, I got this kid here. And he immediately said, take him and give me money. I paid him off after that first fight. That was it. So there you go. So I don't know with Giles, it's a funny one. But one of the first signings that he did, or one of the first things he did, was actually sign and negotiate a contract with Don King and Hector. And this deal would earn $2 million for Hector for 5 title fights. Montoya was straight with Hector from the cuff, and he said that I don't know what happened, but when I got Hector, he had been messing around with drugs. And I said, I don't give a shit about the money, but I care generally. I care about you. If I catch you messing around with drugs, I'll get rid of you. So he's pretty down the middle with him. And it was pretty smooth transition for Hector although he had his old odd relapses, he was sort of being caught smoking weed now and still acting up in the streets with cars, but nothing that Montoya couldn't really handle. And his new mentor said that I got rid of the leeches. I banned the dope addicts, all the guys who he was paying to yell for him. When I was done, he had 6 guys. Before that, he had 20 guys around him. So, these people are just yes men, hangers on. On his return to the ring in December 1985, Hector beat Louis Burke into submission, retiring him on his stall in the fifth. After winning the fight, Hector sat down for a post-fight interview with the CBS commentator Tim Ryan, and he said, I was in the process of telling the TV audience it's nice to have you back. But then Hector started to tear up. And you can see this is quite an emotional interview with Tim Ryan and Hector. And Hector asked Ryan, will you be my friend? And Hector continued with what he was saying. He said, I need friends. That's what he said, Hector told him. And it's a very touching moment, seeing a very young man, still only 22, by the way, and so vulnerable in the public eye. And he's almost like just wanting this close friendship with Tim Ryan. I mean, they had a relationship, but to see it live on audience, you can see it on YouTube. And it's quite upsetting, really, when you see it. 22-year-old kid acting like this, really struggling.
Very emotional interview, and I think if you want to get a feel for how vulnerable he really was at that moment in his life, I think you do need to go back and watch it while you're going through the career of Hector Macho Camacho, because it really does sort of tell you a story of what's actually going on at the time behind the scenes. Although you didn't know it then, hearing the story, doing the research, you kind of can really see it more so than ever. Now, Ryan recalled himself, he was like a little kid who was emotionally spent. It was heartfelt, and we felt like we made a difference. I said something like, nice job in the fight. I wanted to get him to go to commercial, and I just remember how emotional it was and how it stuck with me years later. Montoya elaborated on why Hector was still feeling so depressed, and he said, Hector was a big-hearted guy, and that was the problem with him. He was on a radio show and a guy called up and called him a dopehead. Macho replied, no, man, but that had a lot to do with what happened. Hector wanted to be clean. He always told me, I'm hooked. He was mentally hooked. I told him we would get him out of that bullshit. After the Burke fight, Hector took a mandatory drugs test administered by the New Jersey State Athletic Commission. The results would not be announced for several months after. A familiar face had moved back into the team, Patrick Flannery, as a camp assistant, and would later become the camp coordinator. Flannery, like Montoya and Robert Lee before them, tried different methods to keep Hector out of trouble. Flannery attempted to keep Hector out of a local casino before the Jose Luis Ramirez fight by hiding his clothes, and Flannery recalled, he went out stark naked in the hall. He went all the way up to the elevator before I caught up with him and threw him a pair of pants. Hector was set to earn $500,000 for the Ramirez fight, but he had to pull out of the fight after injuring his leg while playing basketball. Hector was determined not to be forced to fight, and he said, I can't run, and in the gym, I favour my leg. Who should I think about? Don King and the TV guys, and fight this guy on one leg? It's my butt, not Don's hair.
You got to love the personality, just walking about naked. A lot of people said, a lot of his missus, he did used to quite like walking about starkers. So the fight was rescheduled from June to August 10, 1985, and it'd be at the Riviera Hotel and Casino in Nevada for the WBC World Lightweight title, and would be aired live on HBO. Now, Hector wanted his $500,000 purse and demanded, get me a Lamborghini and a bonus. Don, as in Don King, thought it was a Corvette or some $30,000 car. When he found out it cost $100,000, he started playing with his hair. Of course, King ended up using Hector's purse money from that fight to pay for the car. So just as bad as each other, really. Hector's performance that night was nothing short of outstanding. He beat a very good fighter in every department and made him look levels below him. It was after the Ramirez win that Hector said these words, these famous words, I'm the best fighter pound for pound in the world. Bring them on. Mancini, I don't respect your opinion. Come on, baby, so I can knock you out. Ampanel Whitaker, you can have some too, baby. You can get some too. Bramble, Larry Holmes. Oh, yo, niggas. And one more thing, yeah, baby, was becoming his new sort of saying, macho time and yeah, baby, and dropping the N word wasn't very smart. Jerry Villarreal Sr. went on to congratulate Hector on becoming a two-weight world champion. And he said, I remember going up to the suite, opened the door, and there's a puff of smoke. I asked Maria, why is Macho Man smoking? And she said he needs to calm down. He was having a bit of a blaze after the fight. Well, on holiday, now Hector received the news that he had failed a post-fight urine analysis after that Burke fight because of traces of cannabis, which is something that he was beginning to do. He received a 90-day suspension starting on August 26, 1985. 38 other boxers were also suspended by the New York State Athletic Commission at the same time, but only some of the names were released, Hector being one of them. 3 months wasn't a big deal for Hector. Hector was back out in the ring against Freddie Roach in a non-title fight, which meant he could fight without King's involvement. So any title fights involved King, any non-title fights not King. But he also had to enter the ring without his personally designed boxing shorts.
Before the fight, someone actually stole his boxing shorts and he blamed Freddie Roach. Regardless, he went on to win a comfortable decision. After the Roach fight, Hector and Montoya separated due to a location issue, Montoya in California and Hector now in Florida. However, there was also a dispute over preparations for Hector's next fight, and they decided to go their separate ways. Hector was still using drugs when he headhunted financial advisor and WBC president Marty Cohen out of the blue, but their relationship would not be like his others before. Cohen and Hector's partnership was financial advice only, something Camacho needed, and he never took a salary. Cohen advised Hector to buy a training camp north of Miami in a quiet fishing village called Clewiston, a sanctuary for Hector, away from the stresses of the streets, and Cohen recalled, I'd have to say his financial situation was horrible. This young man had earned $5 million since the time he turned professional in 1980. I found that of the $5 million, all that he had was approximately $200,000, and none of that in cash flow. He had a $110,000 condo in New York and a home he purchased in Puerto Rico for his mother. That was it. Hector was happy with his new camp, and he said, I just want to live out here and do my own thing. I want to shoot my guns, ride my motorbike. Here, I've got peace of mind, and that's the best thing that's happened to me in the past few years. Hector's team now included Cohen, Patrick Flannery, Keisha, his girlfriend, Jerry Villarreal Sr. and Jr., Raymond Mohammed, a friend, and many different trainers, sparring partners, and family members, of course, including Hector's mum, Maria, her husband, Ruben, Hector's brother, Felix, and Cohen's wife, Lillian. Cohen also helped Hector incorporate Macho Camacho Inc., plus he had a good relationship with Don King, who now re-entered the picture.
So next up was another Puerto Rican in Edwin Rosario, 28-1, a legendary fighter, also loved by the nation's fans, if not more so. I think they probably did more so at this point. And in an interesting twist, Hector would train with Puerto Rican ex-fighter and trainer Felix Pagan Pinta, who had previously trained Rosario in Clewiston, Florida, while Montoya, who was now left and he was the other side of the country without Hector's knowledge, he ended up joining Rosario's team in the month preceding the bout. So yeah, a real change of stuff, and yeah, we'll come to that because Hector doesn't know Montoya's helping out his opponent. Sports journalist Rafael Brancero traveled to Clewiston before the fight to interview Hector for a documentary, and Hector opened up with honesty. Baracio said he told me he was using marijuana since a young age and that he was accustomed to it. I told him that it could hurt his relationship with the people, but he told me that he was born into an environment that was very different, that he had to deal with that from scratch, and a lot of people his age was doing it. It was a custom of the habitat, probably why Hector had dietary issues as well by this point, if he's puffing away, that Pinto changed before the Rosario fight. So he was putting on a bit of weight, obviously eating too much junk. And once again, talk of Hector not being a proper Puerto Rican then surfaced because obviously Rosario is a proper Puerto Rican. That's what they consider born and bred, and he's moved. Hector responded, he said, sure, I spent most of my life in New York, but that doesn't mean I'm not Puerto Rican as anyone else, does it? And of course not. Moments before the fight, Hector discovered that Montoya was working in Rosario's corner, and this infuriated Hector so much that it put him out of his rhythm in those early stages of the fight. Once again, he felt betrayed by a man that he trusted. The fight itself was the toughest of Hector's career. Absolutely was. It's a change in, I mean, we'll go into a bit more detail than the others, although still fuming from the emergence of Montoya in Rosario's corner. He did start off strong, weathered the storm, showed heart and composure by winning some of the middle rounds, was actually almost knocked down a couple of times and was cut, but Rosario got stronger the more the fight went on, and he was a very difficult puzzle to solve for Hector Camacho.
As we like to say on the show, Hector got away with one on this night, taking a split decision and was harshly booed. To get an idea of the general consensus of who won the fight, only 6 of the 31 journalists polled had Hector winning the fight. Hector responded to Larry Merchant's questions in a post-fight interview, and he said, "It was the most I ever got hit. It was a close fight and I admit it, but I was the more skillful fighter and I proved it." After the fight, Camacho jokingly said, "If I fight him again, I want $1 million. If I'm gonna come out looking like a Cabbage Patch doll, I want to get paid for it." Hector lost a part of his invincibility in this fight, and many believe this fight with Rosario changed him. Wallace Matthews of ESPNNewYork.com wrote, "Camacho was never the same fighter. He still boxed like an angel, but when the going got rough, he ran like the devil. He took no chances, and unless he was absolutely sure that his opponent had been declawed, he rarely went in for the knockout." Hector himself later admitted, "I fought in the Rosario fight like a macho, not a Hector." He also confirmed that the Rosario fight had indeed changed his attitude towards boxing, and he said, "The turning point was the Rosario fight. I started losing interest in boxing, in the fans, and all the antics. I was just doing enough to get over. You try to fight and have some fun, and all you get is criticism. The fans get on you. You hear it on the street, you hear it in the mall, you read it in the papers. It starts to get to you. It stops being fun."
Fell out of love with it. I mean, I don't blame him. Look, he was born in Puerto Rico. He was shipped out to New York because of his abusive father. You know, he would have stayed in Puerto Rico. So for me, he is more Puerto Rican, just as Puerto Rican as Rosario. So he's getting grief from the fans there. That's not good. The dishonesty from his team, you can understand where he is, and obviously the weed's probably not helping, and obviously other drugs as well. Boxing journalist Steve Farhood actually could see it from the outside. He said, "I can't think of one fighter where one fight marks so clearly a turning point in his career." And he won the fight. Most people might not even remember that he won. At that point after the Rosario fight, the joy he showed for the sport was not apparent anymore. Interestingly, Hector came away from the Rosario win with a deviated septum, breathing issues, and hand concerns. But his next fight had already been signed before the Rosario fight, and it would be his first defense against the excellent Cornelius Boza Edwards on September the 26th, 1986 in Miami. It's interesting that, though. It's a very poignant moment, I think, with the issues there. Well, Pinto moved on, and Hector, now 30-0 with 16 knockouts, hired Chuck Talhami as his new trainer. He was clearly not the same fighter that he was, and that was evident after watching the first 6 rounds. Many said that he ran. Others said Boza Edwards just couldn't use educated pressure. It's an interesting fight because it really is. You watch that fight, you don't see the same Hector. Not for me. I'm with them. Even still, Hector managed to navigate his way through the fight and won a unanimous decision. Hector cited weight issues for his below par performance and said that he would be moving up to the 140-pound division. He said, "I can't make the weight. No excuses or nothing. All that bragging is over." After the fight, Hector split with Cohen, who suggested that Hector he needed to get a good psychiatrist. And it was clear that things had now gotten out of control. He employed lawyer Jim Levine at the recommendation of his girlfriend Keisha and her mother to replace Cohen. Hector was now promoted by Jeff Levine, who, with his partner Dennis Rappaport, made up the Ring Warriors Incorporated. And the first 3 fights were underwhelming after the Boza Edwards win. Hector outpointed Howard Davis Jr. to in 1987. He fought only twice in 1988, and for an active fighter, it's crazy. But he beat Reyes Antonio Cruz and Rick Sauce by unanimous decision against Cruz, and then stopping Rick Sauce. But yeah, I'm underwhelming. You can see now his inactivity is killing him, and obviously the drugs.
The reason for his inactivity and below par performance were due to partying, and no doubt his increasing drug addiction, not helped by his days-long partying on the Atlantic City boardwalk. There was also an incident that occurred in between those fights on February the 2nd, 1988, while showing a popular boy band around a local Cliviston high school. Hector allegedly pulled a gun on a high school student he thought had given him the finger. Hector was arrested and questioned on February the 4th after the boy reported the incident. During the interrogation, Hector was caught on camera trying to stash a bag of cocaine and brought up on charges of assault and possession. Hector told the press, "I started signing autographs at the high school. All of a sudden, this one kid starts talking and saying things like lightweight Julio Cesar Chavez could take care of me. I asked him why he was being so disrespectful and why he couldn't be nice to me. Then he gave me the finger. It turns out that kid had a friend who was a police officer. He told the policeman that I had pulled a gun on him. What did I need with a gun against a kid? I've got 2 guns right here in my fists." He then explained that the stashing of the cocaine was a mistake and that it was a contaminated envelope. Later that same year, while in a Ferrari driving along the Florida freeway, Hector was pulled over for driving too slowly, would you believe it? The officer became suspicious when he noticed the passenger in the car was sitting on Camacho's lap. The cop noted, "He was trying to do the wild thing. You're on a date, doing 35 miles an hour. I mean, anybody could see that he was trying to get his thrills." So he's sat in the car with a girl on his knee, and he's literally just trying to have sex with her in the Ferrari, going at 35 miles an hour. Unbelievable. Hector Camacho, what an absolute man of the women.
He's off his head, isn't he? I mean, he's having a great time, and well, I mean, is he really? We'll come to that. So, I mean, he's still fighting, he's still undefeated. You wouldn't think it though. At this point, it seems like his career is dipping. On March 6, 1989, Hector finally fights Ray Mancini in a much anticipated fight that should have taken place years before. Hector made changes in camp again and hired Ishmael Leandry, who would become more than a trainer to him. He would also become a surrogate father. Sort of another one. He loses trust and gains trust, and then these guys do him over. I don't know if this guy does. Hope he doesn't. Both boxers earned over $1 million for their WBO junior welterweight title clash, but the verdict of a split decision win for Hector Camacho was booed. Persistent holding from Hector, constant use of his jab, and a lot of running was not what the sellout crowd wanted to witness. But what did go down in history is that Hector Camacho was now a free weight world champion, just like he promised. Teddy Atlas said that a lot of the fans went south on him after this Mancini fight. So he had to reinvent himself. And he said he did. So his relationship with Keisha ended. And he met another lady, Amy Torres, loved by the family, this lady as well, who became a blessing for Hector Camacho outside the ring. And they would eventually marry in 1991. But before she could become that more positive figure in his life, a week after the Ray Mancini fight, he had ended up in a palm tree after crashing his Lotus. He then he had to squeeze himself out of the car and down the tree. How the hell his car ends up in a palm tree? But then had realized that his championship belt was still in the car. Instead of checking for his injuries, he had retrieved that belt. So he got back up the tree to get the belt, and he walked home. He was high. Clearly, he was high on drugs. He was drunk at the time of the crash. Hector had now become the villain of boxing, and fans were paying their tickets not to watch him to win, but to watch him to lose. Now, after 2 more warm-up fights at the end of 1989, his first defense was against Vinny Pazienza on February the 3rd, 1990, in Atlantic City. There was a lot of trash talk and heated engagements during the build-up to this fight. So the fight was billed, put up or shut up, and it was very much anticipated.
I really want to know how he got his car in a palm tree.
No, to
That
drive up a ramp.
that is that's like something out of Grand Theft Auto, literally.
No,
Like,
it is. It is.
how the hell did he get his car in a palm tree? And not only does he get the car in the palm tree, he then goes back up, climbs the tree, gets his belt out, and then just walks home. I just think that's sort of, I've got visions of this happening. You can imagine it. It
Wow.
is literally something out of a game. It's crazy, but it's quite obvious outside of the ring at this point. He's becoming the villain in the fans' eyes. He's not playing up to the hero moniker anymore, and he's becoming that villain because of his antics outside of the ring. Now, going back to the story and this fight with Vinny Paz, well, this was another one of those excellent Hector Camacho performances where he showed his superior boxing skills and still ridiculously fast hands. So we would implore you as listeners to go back and watch it because it is a brilliant fight, and it's Hector Macho Camacho at his brilliant best. Now, it would seem that due to the animosity between the two fighters, Hector was determined not to lose this fight, so he stuck to his training and he left the drugs on the shelf. However, the celebrations after just became more extreme, and his partying, drinking and cocaine were evident in his performance on February the 23rd, 1991. The still undefeated Camacho, 38-0, took on Greg Hagan, who was 27-3 in Caesars Palace, Las Vegas, in a fight that Hector should have won without any real concern. But he lost. For the first time, a very controversial split decision after being deducted a point for hitting on the brake. The point deduction turned out to be the pivotal moment in the final result. Had Hector not been penalised that point, one of the judges' scorecards would have read 114-114, and the bout would have been declared a draw, with Camacho retaining his title. Now, just 3 months later, and Hector got his revenge, defeating Greg Hagan by split decision in Reno to regain his WBO super lightweight title. Hector admitted afterwards, "I can't be abusing my body and living the nightlife. It's going to kill me down the road." However, Hector once again made a grave mistake while driving with his friend Ruby Gonzalez to Florida. Gonzalez described what happened. "We're heading close to Texas, so I said, let's pull over for the night, and he said, nah, you just need to close your eyes for a little bit. I'll keep driving." Ruby pleaded with him to stop, but Hector convinced him that he was okay to drive.
Well, Ruby Gonzalez, he continued and he explained what happened next. He said, "I went to sleep. I don't know for how long, but I closed my eyes. But he taps me on the shoulder and says, 'Hey, I need money for the toll.' I open my eyes and we're in a line for the border into Mexico. I'm like, what are we doing here? The patrol wave us into the security check. And I'm like, it's okay, Macho. I'll take care of this. Let me talk." He goes, "Yeah, but that's not the problem. I got a little present in the trunk. I got a kilo in the trunk." So I said, "It's okay, Macho. It's okay. Put the top down and I need you to do the macho time thing now." And that's exactly what he did. He jumped up on his car and started shouting out to everyone, "Where's Chavez?" As in Julio Cesar Chavez. Everyone in their cars and even the border police just found it hysterical. Even when the border patrol man's dog went mad at the car, obviously because there's a kilo in the boot, Ruby Gonzalez watched from his rear view mirror, probably absolutely shitting himself, and saw the guy, the trooper, slap his dog and say, "Stop, it's Camacho." It's just like incredible. They actually opened the border for them to turn back round and head back to America. I mean, talk about luck. Well, on the way back, Ruby Gonzalez said Hector dug a hole in the desert right next to the road with a tire iron, and he buried the cocaine before saying, "That's it for me. That changed my life." I mean, it should have. Exhausted from the commotion, they decided to stop at a hotel room for the night before completing the rest of their journey. However, Ruby Gonzalez remembered what happened next. He said, "I go to sleep and I must have woken up 2-3 hours later and he's gone." I'm like, did he just leave me after putting me through all this shit? Then all of a sudden, the doors open. He's covered in dirt. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? He says, "Do you remember where we parked and buried that shit?"
Oh, so you can imagine Camacho again just
Oh,
coming through
God.
the door, hands filthy, trying to dig up where he's buried that kilo of cocaine because he's that desperate to get back to it. He's an addict. It's as simple as that. He's an
Yeah.
addict, and he needed them drugs. He basically spent all night digging holes to find where that stash was.
Not funny, but it's brilliant. I mean, it's I can imagine him doing it in his pants as well. You know, it's nuts.
With no
Uh,
top on. I've got visions of him doing
yeah,
it in just his
exactly.
pants with no top. Well, going back to the story at hand, and Ruby said he finally dropped him home to Amy and said, "Here he is. I don't want to see him for a year." Hector then entered the ring for a warm-up fight in August 1992, almost 2 years since regaining his world title. The following month, he then took on the undefeated Julio Cesar Chavez, who at this point had amassed his unbelievable record of 81-0, and it was for the WBC Super Lightweight title. This was not a unification. Hector had to relinquish the WBO version to get the fight. At the time of the fight, Hector and Amy had their second son, Christian, 3 years after they had their first, called Justin. Fighting again for Don King, Hector earned $3 million. Chavez, at 30, had stopped 18 of his last 19 opponents since he won the title in May of 1989. Comparatively, Hector had fought 8 times during the same period. 2 of those victories were controversial split decisions. To say this was a one-sided fight would be an understatement. Julio Cesar Chavez dominated Hector, and Hector, well, he took his punishment. This was not a fight that represented Camacho's boxing abilities, but it did show the macho side because he took the beating like a man, where many would have buckled under the pressure. He showed amazing grit, guts and determination. Ironically, he may have gained a few more fans in the loss than in any of his previous wins. For the first time in years, fans saw Hector engage, not run, but get brutalised in the process. However, the demons within Hector returned stronger than ever, and the drugs began to completely take over his life, even before he married Amy in 1991. She checked him into rehab in hope that he would clean himself up. Somehow, Hector stayed active and relevant enough to earn million-dollar paydays against younger fighters, but he just didn't make a conscious effort to stop abusing the drugs. And again, he just goes back to that what if moment. Like, what if he wasn't on them drugs when he fought Julio Cesar Chavez? It really makes you think about the potential of what that could have been, but instead, he's not looking after himself outside of the ring, and he gets a beating from an absolute prime Julio Cesar Chavez.
He does. It's not a fight to go back and watch if you're a Camacho fan, and it really just demonstrates. But in saying that, if you like that machoism, I mean, he could have buckled under that. He could have surrendered, and he took his beating. Almost the crowd respected him for it. It's crazy. He gets respect from getting an absolute beatdown than all these other great victories he had. But he's on the drugs have taken effect now. I mean, you can be young and do it and get away with it. When you get to sort of going into your 30s, you just can't maintain it. So over the next year, Hector fought 3 times and set himself up for a welterweight showdown with countryman Felix Tito Trinidad, who had begun to now carry the mantle as the next Puerto Rican legend. And on January the 29th, 1994, Hector, still ranked highly by the IBF, 8th in fact, entered the fight with his team led by Ismael Limdry. Hector was nowhere near the levels he had been and was outclassed by the young Puerto Rican star. Retirement should have been considered. Even Flannery made his feelings public. He said Hector's been in serious boxing, smokers in Harlem since he was 10 years old. I think it's time for him to get out. I'm afraid of a serious injury for him. His skills have eroded. He can't see the punches to the head anymore. Now, it was the mid-90s now. Hector was on the verge of becoming a fighter that younger stars looked as a benchmark for a world title. During this difficult time, Hector Jr. recalled that things weren't going well for us. And I will never forget this. I was doing my homework and he comes over to me and says, Pappy, everything will be okay. We have no money, but we will be okay. I will get fights with Roberto Duran, Oscar De La Hoya, and Sugar Ray Leonard, and we will be okay. And that's what he did. He went and resurrected his career off mostly old men. I never forget that. And box analyst Al Bernstein reflected on the new Hector, who always earned his money but would continue to party hard afterwards, win, lose, or draw. So, this is what Al Bernstein says. Even among those fights where he took a beating, they didn't knock him out. And that was amazing. One of the things that probably is overlooked with Camacho was his toughness.
After losing to Trinidad on January the 29th, 1994, Hector actually won 19 of his next 20 fights to justify another big payday. One of his victories was a forgettable showdown with the 45-year-old Roberto Duran on June the 22nd, 1996. Realistically, no one expected much from the fight, but emotions before made it entertaining. After arriving late for a press conference in New York, Hector interrupted Duran with a macho jingle and dance. Hector then began to cry before saying, "I've always respected you as a great fighter, and you come here and disrespect me?" In a turn of events, the fighters ended up attacking each other. If you go on YouTube again, good old YouTube, you can see these moments where Camacho's going through quite a strange range of emotions, crying and then getting angry and then trying to scrap with Duran. Well, in the fight, Hector actually took a comfortable unanimous decision against him. And Duran, well, he was a shadow of his former self, but still a nice name to have on your boxing CV. He then baited Sugar Ray Leonard out of retirement, and they met on March the 1st, 1997, under the £160 limit. Hector earned $2 million to Leonard's $4 million purse in a fight that ended in the 5th round, with Hector actually stopping Leonard in a one-sided fight. This was Hector's last significant win, even though Leonard hadn't fought in 6 years. The legendary Sugar Ray held no grudges and he said, "He beat me fair and square. I will take that to the bank." On September the 13th, 1997, Oscar De La Hoya defended his WBC welterweight title against Hector Camacho at the Thomas & Mack Center in Las Vegas. Promoted by Top Rank, De La Hoya was 25-0, making his 4th defence of the title, and had few concerns that Hector, now trained by Pat Burns, would be a significant threat. That theory proved to be correct. The fight was almost a carbon copy of the Chavez defeat. Hector took excessive punishment, fought back, showed heart and determination, but would not surrender.
De La Hoya put Hector on the canvas in the 9th, marking the first time he had been knocked down since 1988, highlighting that durability that Al Bernstein actually mentioned earlier, which is something you do fail to remember, and just doing this makes you realise actually this guy's tough. De La Hoya battered Hector with fierce combinations, then coasted to a unanimous decision that Camacho had come through with the promise he had made to his son, fighting Duran, Leonard and De La Hoya, and earning $3 million in that last bout. So he earned himself probably about $8 million, I'd say. Hector refused to retire though and fought for the next 12 years. His last fight, a unanimous decision loss to Saul Duran on May 14, 2010. Incredible, really. He finished his Hall of Fame career with 3 legitimate world titles at 130, 135 and 140 pounds, and a record of 79, 6-3 with 38 knockouts. He also refused to stop taking cocaine and lived the high life, so much so that in January 1998, Hector's wife got a restraining order against him for an alleged assault. His addiction became his bit on the side, like Johnny Tapia said. It was his mistress, but would eventually become a permanent fixture in his life. Hector divorced his wife, was shot 3 times in a carjacking in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and faced child and domestic abuse allegations. Now, these claims of child abuse were a rare moment when he basically pushed his son away. He's high on drugs. He's gone to the house. He's pushed his son out of the way in a drug rage, and it was just one of those things. He didn't actually do anything. Just pushed him onto the bed. The mum mentioned it. So his wife Amy didn't want to press charges, or his ex-wife was going to be, but the state did, and Hector was of course left absolutely devastated. I mean, he was always on the moments of pure joy or jubilation, and he went into a bit of a depression thinking, God, like the child abuse thing, it really was just a little push. Like, he did not abuse his children anyway, and I think that'd be the one thing he would always abide by, and we don't ever want to make it out like it was, because that's why we went into the details of it. Just can't, because he loved his kids. There's one thing he did do: he abused himself. While facing these charges, he was arrested for burglary and possession in Mississippi. He was This was happened on December the 2nd, 2004, when a drunk Hector fell through the ceiling of the ZDI Computer Center in Gulfport, Mississippi. He was climbing through the ceiling space that separated the store from his apartment, trying to retrieve his personal computer. Once inside, he stole 7 laptops and nearly $6,000 in cash, causing $13,000 in damages.
It's like his old habits from when he was a youngster have just come back to completely haunt what was going on in his life at the time. But again, we can't stress enough, as the story tells you, how hooked he was on drugs at this moment, how drugs had completely taken over his life. And, you know, anybody that suffers from that type of an addiction, you know, everything else becomes irrelevant to them. Family, friends, you know, loved ones, anybody or anything is irrelevant to the fix. And that's how he was at that moment in time, stealing computers, doing these types of things that you just wouldn't expect him to do. It's absolutely crazy how his life had turned around at this point. Now, in 2005, Hector hits rock bottom when officials apprehended him at the Imperial Palace Hotel and Casino in Biloxi, Mississippi, when they found him in possession of ecstasy and charged him with commercial burglary and felony possession. Facing years in prison, he had nowhere to turn and no excuses. He was denied bail on the burglary and possession charges and had to sign over his black crossfire to pay his lawyer. He was sent to jail in May 2007 and sentenced to the maximum 7 years for the burglary charge, but Harrison County Circuit Judge Steve Simpson suspended 6 years of the sentence and gave Hector a year of house arrest in Puerto Rico. It was an all-time low for Hector, and in the words of Bazooka Limon, must have ranged true in his mind when he told him after their fight in 1982, "Kid, you're going to be a great champion. Just be careful how you pick your friends. Make sure you have good people around you. Everybody wants to be around a winner, but when you're like me, at the end of your career, nobody will want to be around." The one thing that was always reliable for Hector was, of course, cocaine. It was always there when he needed it. His sister Raquel said, "You can't tell him nothing. Hector is Hector." He would take the advice, but then would be like, yeah, leave me alone. Tim Sinante, owner of the High Trade Hideaway, a popular nightclub in New York City, said that Hector regularly attended, and he said no matter how much money he had, his heart was always in East Harlem. He's from East Harlem, born and bred. He never forgot who he was. He helped a lot of kids in the street. He knew a lot of those junkie kids in the street.
And Tim even reminisced on the kind of things he did for those hard-up kids. He said he would call me up at a bar and say, "Julio is coming over, give him some money," and I would give him $50. He always remembered these kids on the streets. You could take Macho out of the streets, but never take the streets out of Macho. Hector met Shelley Sales Massey, and they actually become an item. She witnessed his drug adventures, which often included traveling to the most deprived projects and cities looking for his next fix. That behavior frightened her, but as everyone says about Hector, away from that, he was always just this nice and caring guy. And she said that Shelley said, "I remember when I found out about his drug habit, but he did it so well. He used to promise me, 'I'll get better, I will.' Then in New Jersey, he went to a drug rehab for a day. He hit a girl who worked there with a tray and was kicked out." Hector began living in a small, dirty apartment in Tampa, Florida in 2010, which was apparently crawling with cockroaches. And his brother Felix, Boo Boo, as we mentioned earlier, and his wife Betsy attempted to intervene, but it didn't work. Hector responded, he said, "I am who I am." So at this point, I mean, the best thing for him to do, he felt, is to get out of Florida. So he moved back to Puerto Rico. He started to reinvent himself by participating in their version of Strictly Come Dancing and seemed to have cleaned himself up. But a year later, he was shot at while trying to buy some more cocaine. Now, he tried his best to minimize that incident, saying that, "I'm safe here, everybody loves me, they must not have known who I am, or they wouldn't have tried to shoot me." So just to make, before we jump onto his next bit, I mean, he was this Strictly thing, he was a part of the show. I think they kicked him off after the first week, but he still remained on the show because he the ratings were booming. Everyone was loving him out there. He was having a great time. He looked like he was clean. You can see the difference in him as well. He looks like he's cleaned himself up. And even the sisters in the documentary say that too. He just, again, the drugs just come back again. And on the evening of November 2012, Hector and his new girlfriend, Cynthia Castillo, were at home watching television when his friend, Adrian Mojica Marino arrived and asked him to come with him for a drive.
Adrian was known to the police with a drug conviction a little while back, and our assumption is that he would have been on his way to collect more drugs for distribution or personal use, and he wanted Hector to go with him. Hector Camacho, now 50, was in Bayamón, a city in the metropolitan area of San Juan, Puerto Rico, sitting in the passenger side of a Mustang on his phone with 49-year-old Adrian Moreno, when gunshots were fired. One man was found dead behind the car. That was Adrian, who was shot 3 times and killed instantly. The other, Hector, was shot in the face while still sitting in the passenger seat. The bullet entered through his jaw, ripping up 3 to 4 main arteries and lodging in his right shoulder. In the process, the bullet bounced off a bone, fractured 2 of his vertebrae, and severely disrupted the blood flow to his brain. The assailants fled in an SUV, or a grey vehicle depending upon which reports you read, and then survived a shootout with the police. Details later confirmed that the ambush was drug-related, with 10 bags of cocaine found in the Mustang, 9 in Moreno's possession, and 1 open in the car. Hector, unconscious, was rushed to Centro Medico, the main trauma centre in San Juan. The media and family members descended upon the hospital. Rio Pages Medical Center Director Ernesto Torres confirmed to the press later that evening that Hector was in a critical condition. On life support, Hector's condition worsened and he stopped breathing at one point. A day after the shooting, Hector was in a coma fighting for his life. Torres noted that Hector showed irregular and intermittent brain activity, but there was little hope. 2 days after the shooting, doctors pronounced Hector clinically brain dead, as Torres released this statement: "We have done all that we can do."
Well, Camacho Jr., he flew over to be with his family, and despite his objections, Maria made the final decision to remove her son from life support. And this is what he recollected. He said, "When the doctor came to me, or came in to talk to me, I saw that my dad's heart rate went up from 73 to 85. I thought he was doing good, but the doctor said that he was on the machine, and all the doctor wanted to do was talk to me about my dad's organs, what to do with my dad's organs, and that pissed me off. I couldn't take it anymore." So once Junior sat down with Maria to discuss the possibility of what to do with Hector, the stress became overwhelming, and he recalled that she screamed at me, "Are you going to take care of him?" And I just didn't see it like that. Junior did not push back against her decision, and soon Maria told the media that my son is not alive. My son is only alive for the people that love him. Junior countered that his father was a fighter and would fight until the end, but the decision was final. It's an acceptance thing for me for Junior. I think, I don't know now. I mean, maybe you look back and think, it wasn't going to pull through. On Saturday, November 24, 2012, Hector Macho Camacho was declared dead and officially taken off the life support machine. Thousands mourned his death. In San Juan, Puerto Rico, on Tuesday, November 27, a scene erupted during a viewing held inside the San Juan Gymnasium. Still struggling to be identified as Hector's true love, his ex-girlfriends scuffed during this thing, claiming to be Macho's last real girlfriend before he was killed. And Cynthia Castillo created a stir when she bent over to kiss Hector in the casket and then joined the area designated for family members. Ex-girlfriend Gloria Fernandez, along with Hector's sister Esther and Estrella, took offense and attacked Castillo. The fight spilled over and people quickly intervened to break it up. But I mean, just a mess, really. That was not good. Hector's body was then moved from San Juan, Puerto Rico to New York in the United States 3 days later.
Absolute craziness. The whole thing is just sheer craziness. I mean, the fact that he was there in the first place, the fact that the family are clearly squabbling at the time, of course, in grief of what was going on, which must have been really difficult for them. I can't even begin to imagine the sort of grief that they were going through and the people around him. And obviously, because he loved his women, he had two different women there basically fighting over him when he's not even alive anymore, which I found quite crazy, really, to think about how much people adored him, so much so that everybody who just wanted to have some sort of claim to be a part of his life, even though, you know, for the most part he'd struggled with his drug addiction. But as you rightly pointed out, at the time, before his death, you know, seemingly it was looking like things were starting to look up for him. Now, going back to what was happening at the time, and on December the 1st, 2012, friends and fans piled in to St. Cecilia's Roman Catholic Church in East Harlem on East 106th Street for a public mass gathering. A horse-drawn carriage delivered Hector's coffin to the church, with hundreds waiting outside behind a barrier, with newspapers and magazines decorated with Hector's image. His casket, draped in the Puerto Rican flag, was carried into the church. Hundreds of mourners attended the service. Frank Skelly, a priest at the church when Hector attended elementary school, spoke of the fallen boxer, and he said, "He could make us laugh and feel sad. He could lift us up, and he could break our hearts. He was one of a kind, and stood out from the crowd. At the same time, he was one of us." As family and friends exited the church, a Macho Time chant began, and thousands cheered when they lifted the coffin into the hearse. It was a warranted send-off for the little man, or the Harlem heckler, or as we knew him, Macho. Completely overwhelmed and grief-stricken, Maria screamed uncontrollably for her son and tried to get back his casket. She clapped and was taken to Jacob Hospital to be treated for a panic attack. But not before shouts of "Mi Estrella, mi Estrella, my star, could be heard from Maria. Junior all but missed saying goodbye to his father at the cemetery because he was stuck in the office trying to figure out how he was going to pay for the funeral. When all seemed lost, a silver lining emerged through the clouds. As family and friends squabbled in the church about who would cover the funeral bill, an old friend stepped up, Pee Wee Rucker, who vowed never to leave Hector's side because he knew his friend had never left his.
Great gesture there from Pee Wee Rucker, and he didn't use to fight all his undercards, and he was nowhere near that level, but he made sure he always got fights. So with Hector now finally laid to rest, attentions quickly turned to what happened that night. And in the days and weeks following the shooting, a number of theories about what happened began to emerge. One was that Hector was just in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong friend, that the men who did the shooting were just trying to kill his friend Adrian Marino over drugs, but didn't realize that Hector was in the car, so shot him too. The other theory comes from the streets, and Junior Camacho said, well, this is what he said he was told. He said by someone on the streets, your father wasn't too light towards the end of his times, meaning that Hector was the intended target who had problems with people linked with the underground drug market. And this is particularly in the Jardine de Canto residence. It was a criminal hub for the drug trade in Puerto Rico. Now, when filming a documentary, Macho, the Hector Camacho story, a taxi driver's interviewed Miguel Ango Santiago, also known as Pasteles, who knew Hector and he knew the streets well of Puerto Rico. And he believed that the two brothers that were originally arrested were the shooters. He said, I wasn't there, but the story was told was they were hitmen and who were actually paid to kill people. Well, in a bizarre twist, 4 months after his final interview for their film, Pasteas was actually killed by a shot to the face. Now, the last motive revolves around an insurance policy collected by Adrian Marino's wife, Eva Santana, who apparently put a hit on him to get insurance. Santana was interviewed and gave statements, but was never a real suspect. Forensics scientists obviously continue to conduct tests on the evidence collected, but it was a very slow process. And without any more evidence and a lack of eyewitnesses coming forward, the investigation at that point was halted.
Camacho Jr. was left confused, and he said they had a lead at first and they thought it was two brothers, but one got shot and killed and the other was let go because he didn't fit the description of the killer. Now they say it's three guys. 15 shots were fired and no one saw anything. According to the Associated Press, the two suspects that were reportedly being investigated for the crime were cleared of the murders. The Associated Press wrote, Puerto Rico police said forensic evidence had cleared the two men suspected in the killing of Hector Macho Camacho. Police spokesman Alex Diaz said that evidence also showed the suspect's impounded car was not used in the crime. Then 7 years later, in November 2019, Maria was finally called and told to travel to Puerto Rico because they had some new leads. The case had now been transferred from the local Bayamón precinct to the police headquarters in San Juan, where a new detective was working with the FBI. The detective told Maria, "In the last 4 months, we have made huge advancements on the case. We know who did it. I am looking for a conviction. I am looking to put someone in a jail cell. I want to make sure you can sleep peacefully at night with the truth." Maria was overjoyed with the update. However, it would be another 2.5 years until police finally made arrests on March the 9th, 2022. The Associated Press reported, 5 men are accused in the slaying of the fighter nicknamed Macho Camacho and a friend while they sat in a Ford Mustang outside a bar in November 2012. 3 of the suspects were serving federal sentences for unrelated crimes and were flown in from Florida as part of what police called Operation Knockout.
A 4th suspect was arrested in the pre-dawn hours in the same city where Camacho was killed, emerging with only a towel wrapped around his waist just minutes after police with long weapons surrounded his house and knocked on a window. A 5th suspect remains in a Puerto Rican or Rico prison for an unrelated case. Authorities said 2 other suspects were killed in unrelated events in 2013 and 2015. Hours after the suspects were charged, Camacho's elderly mother strode into Puerto Rico's Department of Justice and raised her right fist and shouted, "Justice, justice has been done." Janet Parra, a public prosecutor who oversees the Justice Development's Division of Organized Crime and Drugs, said she could not reveal the motive behind the killing or share any evidence. However, she said authorities pursued every tip received, noting that sometimes it led them to a dead end. 3 suspects were identified as William Rodriguez, Luis Ayala Garcia, and Joshua Mendez Romero, who are being held on a $800,000 bond. The 4th suspect was identified as Jesus Narando Adorno, being held on a $300,000 bond. The 5th was identified as Juan Figueroa Rivera, held on $1 million bond. So he's obviously got to be the main culprit here, $1 million bond, a lot more than the others. Their attorneys could not be immediately reached for comment. Camacho's mother said, "They gave me justice, I can sleep in peace." And that is pretty much how this story ends. We will just finish off with a few quotes as well before we sort of do our bit, Sean, at the end, starting with Hector's longtime friend, Ruby Gonzalez, who made an excellent analogy on Hector's life that led him to this point. He said, "In aviation, where there is a chain of events that create an accident, the bullet that killed Macho in Puerto Rico started his journey many years ago." That's a great way of saying it. He also said that we were always lucky and we walked away from a lot of things. He just kept playing Russian roulette to the end, but the problem was he kept adding another bullet to the chamber.
Teddy Atlas also described that tragedy always lingered around Hector, that it was almost meant to be, and he said he was a tremendous fighter, tremendous talent, he was a pioneer, but boxing sometimes can be too damn Shakespearean. It's got its beautiful stories, but it's got its share of sad ones too. I figure a kid like this that comes from where they came from, and he gets to the pinnacle of success in a tough world, in the toughest business that there are, fighting, and he gets to the top. But at the end, it's almost like the tragedy had to be. It's too bad. We will now leave you with quotes by the man himself, Hector Macho Camacho, And he said, I came from the streets. I had all my hopes in it from head to toe. I got my mother a house. I got cars forever. Well known, well loved. I'm making it for the people that never made it. I'm making it for the people that ain't gonna make it. I had the bachelor life with 500 or 600 women and the money and the fame, but part of that was trouble. I tried to be a fighter, a lover and a fly guy. I'm lucky really to be alive the way I've lived. Most people probably would have been shot up in the street or be in jail, or both. Now that obviously is a quote that was said prior to his passing, of course, if you're wondering why we've said that at the end, but I think it's the irony of it, especially of that last particular line when he says most people probably would have been shot up in the street or be in jail or both, and you know that's essentially what happened to him. He was shot up. Now, in terms of the case, the guys that we've mentioned are on trial for murder, so the sentencing, as far as we're both aware, hasn't actually come to pass as yet. So we're kind of closing this story off because there is an end to it. Essentially, they've actually caught the killers, but it's took them 10 years to do it. 10 whole years for them to actually find the people that did this to Hector Camacho, and at present we don't truly know the motives behind why he was killed. There's a lot of theories. We've gone through them theories. Again, a lot of it can be put down to maybe conspiracies around what was going on in his life at the time. But ultimately, once this episode is aired and you've listened to it, we might have more information to add to it as an addendum, but ultimately it tells you a story about a flamboyant fighter who came from the hardest of upbringings to be able to go to that top level of the sport, get so much fame and notoriety, but at the same time the demons outside of the rings very much parallel those to Johnny Tapia, who we covered for season 2's opener as well, and it's a very parallel story, just that Johnny Tapia died through his own issues and abuse that he put on his body, whereas Camacho, he was murdered. He was murdered by people that either didn't know who he was or knew who he was and decided to go one step further and do something to him. It was like that old cliche saying of you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And whilst it shouldn't have happened to Camacho and he should still be with us, it's just a shame that, things had to end the way they did for Camacho. But it was a very difficult life. This story's told me a lot about his outside of the ring activities, the difficulties he struggled with. Again, I can only say it's eerily similar to Johnny Tapia's story, just that the ending is different.
It is. It's so much like that. And obviously, with Johnny, he had Teresa. So Hector didn't. He had people around him, but people kept doing him over as well. And obviously, you hear through the grapevine now that those within camp were feeding him the drugs as well. And he was on the drugs from very young. So it's almost like, all the people around didn't really try and help. The ones that did step in by then, it's too late, wasn't it? So it's a sad one, really, because he although he had this bravado when he was on the camera and sort of when he got to that point where he was being a bit of an arse and saying some stupid things, on the outside, it looks, oh God, no wonder why people wanted to see him get beat, because this is his mouth for a little toe rag. But in actual fact, everything, you get anything on Hector Camacho, you can read whatever you want about him, you can watch documentaries, everybody says the same thing. He is generally a lovely guy. Generally, there's not a bad bone in his body. When he's out there, he'll do anything for you. But yeah, I mean, the street fighting, it's almost inevitable what was going to happen with exactly that. He kept loading the playing Russian roulette and kept loading the chamber, as they kept saying. But it's a tragic ending. It really is. I mean, the only thing I would say is, go back and watch that documentary, Macho Time, The Miratic Rise and Tragic Fall of Hector Camacho, the book as well by Christian Goodis. I'd say read that. It's got some great information in there. And there's several articles out there. But, you watch those documentaries and you read the books and you listen to this. And I think the general consensus is he was generally a nice fella. It was just drugs took over. I suppose the only other thing you mentioned Tapia, the only other person I can compare him to is with Ruben Carter as well. Very similar street fighting background, goes to prison, but not as long, and then obviously doesn't get done for murder. It's the flip side of things. So it's very similar with Hector and Ruben, and also Rocky Graziano. A lot of those guys had that street fighting sort of in them, and then eventually, with Hector and Tapia, obviously the drugs really mess them guys up. Yeah, I mean, it's just a tragic ending. But I mean, I'll tell you what, before that Rosario, all the fights before that Rosario fight, go back and have a look because he's a tremendous fighter. He really was.
There's some great fights to still look at after the Rosario fight. There's some flamboyant moments, and his entrances and his outfits and everything he brought to the sport inspires guys. And I mentioned Prince Naseem Hamed, not so much in a comparison. Like Naseem Hamed, I haven't really heard him ever say this, but surely Macho Camacho has got to be one of the inspiring figures within boxing that he's looked at and gone, you know what, I'm going to do something here that's going to give that shock value to the boxing fans and endear them to it. And how funny was it that Naseem Hamed was very flamboyant like that as well. And I think Camacho surely have got to have been an influence. And there's many fighters that try to emulate, you know, that style that he brought to the ring, but nobody can replicate it, and I don't think anyone ever will. And that's the beauty of what he did. He was a one-off individual, a one-off guy, a one-off human, and a one-off fighter, and we're never going to get another Macho Camacho. And like we said, you know, once more information does become available about what happens to those that are being prosecuted for the murder of Macho Camacho and Adrian Moreno, then we'll certainly bring that to you, maybe as an addendum to the series or to the show in general, because it will be really interesting to sort of see more of the detail of what goes down. At the moment, there is no accessible information to us. Maybe if you're listening to this from Puerto Rico or from some parts of America and you can actually access more information that we cannot, I'd be really love to hear from you. I'd really love to know what's actually going on, you know, behind the scenes in terms of how things are going there. But for us, you know, it's an open and shut case essentially that they finally, after 10 years, caught the perpetrators of this crime, and that, you know, his mother, his family, his son in particular are going to get closure on this for them and hopefully are able to not so much move on from what's happened, but at least learn to live with it in a better way. You know, having that little bit of peace of mind that the people that done this, that took his life, are now behind bars and are given the correct level of justice as a result of the crime. So it'll be interesting to find out what does happen in the aftermath of this. And for us, it's been an enjoyable tale for the most part, talking about his career, talking about certain elements of it. Of course, it's the darker side of boxing, so the true crime element of it, the drugs, the scandals, the murder at the end, it all plays a part of what we like to tell on these episodes. So we hope that you have genuinely enjoyed this opening episode to Season 3, the tale of Hector Macho Camacho. If you have, please let us know on social media at darker_side_pod. If you want to follow the main hub, it's at BTR Boxing Pod on Twitter, or on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube or TikTok. You can find us by typing in BTR Boxing Podcast Network. Finally, to end this episode, we want to say thank you to all the patrons of the podcast. All you individuals that support this podcast, thank you so much for your support. We hope you've enjoyed having early access to this episode and an ad-free version of this episode. And if you're not a patron and you want to look at what we do cover on the Patreon membership service, please visit patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast Network. That is all from us for this episode. Thank you for listening to the darker side of boxing.